PowerShell. We're going to be more than 20. There's often they like when you're going to do a title for a session like this to actually come up with a number. And if you exceed it, you're fine. But if you're one less, your entire comment thread will be, he only did 19. I can't give him a good mark if he only did 19. So you do more and then people, they're a little less reluctant to go, well, he did 25. So I'm not sure about the session title. Anyway. Many server administrators, and I was talking a little bit about this yesterday when I did a session yesterday where I sort of talked about rolling core infrastructure upgrades. And one of the things I shared with the group was that the average age of an IT pro is about 42. So IT pros are unlike developers. Developers are like Logan's Run. They kill them off when they get to 30. Right? With IT pros, most of us have actually been in the business and as a cohort have moved through. A lot of us, who is here administering or working with Windows NT 4? Okay, so you're seeing we've moved as a cohort. So there's a lot of problems that we face, and PowerShell is to a certain extent one of them, in that we're in a job that requires us to constantly learn. But as we're getting older, the opportunities, it's not like when we were 25 when we could sit down and binge learn something very quickly and then be great with it the next week. Now we've sort of got to balance family, work, relaxation if that happens, watching Australia get beaten in the sport on television, which I believe is very important, and things like that. So learning a new thing, learning a different way of thinking about it is actually quite difficult. So even though Microsoft has been shouting from the rooftops about PowerShell, even though I've done sessions at TechEd here before, Ignite, before about PowerShell, there's a lot of people who are like, yeah, great, we'd love to learn it, but we just don't have the time. Is there an easy way that we can get into it? And that's sort of what this session is about. This session is about taking day-to-day tasks that you do, very simple tasks, and just getting you to think, hey, I can do that in a line of PowerShell. Because the reality is, if you show most server administrators a block of script and say, oh, go and learn that, they're like, yeah, that's a lot of script. And yeah. Whereas you give them a line and it does something that they understand what it does, they go, yeah, I can do that. I get that. I've got time to learn that. And it's about treating PowerShell like a drug. The first few hits are free. You start off with the really simple stuff. And this is what I've got. I'm friends with Don Jones, who's written a bunch of those big PowerShell books. And a lot of people, when they go and write a PowerShell book, start things like, let's talk about variables. And it's like, I'm not doing IT anymore at uni. I don't want to learn about it. I got into server administration, so I didn't have to program that much. So again, let's start off with some simple stuff. Show you how to do things with a single line of PowerShell. Now, the company line is that PowerShell is absolutely a critical skill for your future career working in the Microsoft stack. And that is not an unreasonable thing to say. I don't think it needs to be as soon as some people are saying, but it's certainly something that you've got to keep an eye on. And why I say it doesn't necessarily need to be as soon is if we look at what happened with Windows Server 2003. And again, I got people to put their hand up if they were running Server 2003 in their environment. And in yesterday's session, about 40% of people put their hands up. So what I'm talking about here is that the future is not in some ways coming as fast as Microsoft would like it to. But as people that are attending a conference like this, you do have your eyes on the future and you are aware that these changes are coming and it's good to be prepared for them. Now, Jeffrey Snover is a very important name here. Jeffrey Snover is the guy who invented PowerShell. Jeffrey Snover is also the guy who is in charge of Windows Server and System Center at Microsoft. So quite naturally, he has a bias towards taking his baby and his job and bringing them together. He is very pro you need to learn this. And sometimes he's a bit blunt. He's literally like, well, if you don't learn PowerShell, you know, you should get used to saying, do you want fries with that? I don't think that that's entirely true. But when you're getting blunt talk like that from the person in charge of Windows Server and System Center, it's probably worth paying some degree of attention to that. Now, he says that servers shouldn't have GUIs. And there's technical reasons for this. The more GUI something has, the more of an attack surface it has. If you're running server core versus full server with a GUI, the number of times you have to reboot the server to apply updates over the course of a year is dramatically reduced. I'll talk about Nano Server in a minute, but the difference is if you had server with a GUI hosting a domain controller role versus a server with Nano Server running the same role, last year you would have rebooted the Nano Server 4 times and you would have rebooted the server with the GUI 27 times. So think about it purely from an uptime perspective. So, as I said, indoctrinating yourself with PowerShell is probably, most likely, or certainly, a good long-term career strategy. So that's my setup. So in this session, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about basic configuration tasks. Those of you who were at my session last year, where I got out the Razer gaming device and put PowerShell commands in that, and was sitting there going, watch me do this. Some of these commands are going to be familiar. Then we're going to get on to core role tools. Core roles, nothing exciting, nothing amazing. What I'm trying to do here is give you a quick look at how quickly you can use a short amount of PowerShell to do very common tasks. So we'll look at Active Directory, we'll look at file servers, we'll look at DHCP servers, and we'll look at DNS servers. And then during the talk, it won't be at the end, I'll actually show you something that you can do with ISE called snippets, and how snippets work and how you can get the interface to basically remember code that you're going to reuse on a fairly regular basis. So let's talk about basic configuration tasks. Renaming a computer. You turn a computer on, the first time you spin it up and it's assigned a random name. One of the first things you need to do to this computer is rename it. Now, renaming it from the command prompt got a bit messy. You could right-click on System Properties, you could go into that system dialog, you could change it there. Or you could open a PowerShell prompt, you could type rename computer, and in this case, you might type in ignite nzdemo. Then you'll get a message saying reboot the computer. That's all you have to do to rename a computer. Rename computer, new name. So think about how you renamed a computer in the past versus how you can do it with one line of very quick PowerShell. This is sort of where I'm going with this. To restart a computer, well, you can go Start, and depending on what operating system, try and find the Power, Restart the computer. Maybe type in the reason that you're meant to be rebooting the computer if you're really, really good. The most common reason for rebooting a computer is ASDF. Maybe QUERTY, but never, I'm doing this because I'm applying an update. I mean, I'm sure there's someone here that's really diligent and saying, well, I actually really type a reason every time I do this, and I don't know what everybody else is doing. But most of you probably don't fill in that dialog box all that diligently. So, simply restart computer. In fact, I find it much quicker. PowerShell, restart computer, enter. It's going to work on anything. Any Windows Server 2012, Windows Server 2012 R2, Windows 8, Windows Server 2016, Windows 10. To shut down a computer, stop computer. Dead easy. I just want it to shut it down. Stop computer. Now, these commands, restart computer, stop computer, you can use the -computer name parameter and then do it remotely. So if you want to restart a remote computer, restart -computer computer name no dash teched nzdemo. Remote restart, assuming that you've got the appropriate credentials. So again, one of the other things that Microsoft's trying to get across to you is this idea of remote administration. So I mentioned Nano Server before. Nano Server is one of the new server deployment options that's coming with Windows Server 2016. The secret with Nano Server, or the benefit of Nano Server, is off the bat, you need about 400 meg of RAM to run it, and you need about half a gig of disk space to host it. So suddenly you go from, I've got to go out and put a DNS server, a DHCP server, and a domain controller and a branch office, and to host that in Hyper-V, or VMware, or whatever you're using, I need to allocate a certain amount of system resources. Well, with Nano Server, you're allocating a lot less. You can get a much higher server density, and that's one of the reasons that Microsoft did it. Another one was simply that 4 reboots a year scenario. And if you're Microsoft and you're using Nano Server to host your racks in an Azure data center, or in all of the Azure data centers in the world, and you've got 37 million servers, the difference between 28 reboots and 4 reboots a year is absolutely measured in tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, that's the good side of Nano Server. It's really small and you don't need to reboot it. The challenging side, you can't log on locally to it. You deploy Nano Server, and all you can do right now, and all you will be able to do, is see what IP address it is, or manually set an IP address, shut it down, restart it. Everything else you've got to do remotely, using your remote tools. Because what Microsoft's really talking about, one of their big things, is that you should never be RDPing across to servers to manage them. That's inefficient. And the example is, if you had to go and install a software update on 50 computers in your organisation, 50 servers, would you RDP across to each one, sign in, run Windows Update, apply the update, do the restart? Or would you find some way to do the same command against every computer? You'd do the second. The other thing that you should consider, when most of us got started, when I got started in server administration, in 1996, I was responsible for managing 5 servers. Today, I talk to people who are responsible for managing many hundreds, if not many thousands of servers. At Facebook, the server to admin ratio is 1 to 25,000. The most expensive thing in your data center is you. That's why there's always new technologies making you more efficient. And this remote administration, this PowerShell, is one of those technologies. Now, getting your IP address. Everybody here knows ipconfig. But you can do this from PowerShell, and the advantage of doing it from PowerShell is you can go and pump it into other things. You can go and pipe that output from one bit of PowerShell into another. But that's a bit more advanced than where we're going in this particular session. So get net IP configuration. This is what it does. That's what the output looks like of just get net IP configuration. It tells me the IP address, it tells me the DNS server, it tells me the default gateway. I can set an IP address. Now, if you're doing it the really difficult way, you right-click on the network, you go to Network and Sharing Center, you find the adapter, you right-click on the adapter, you go Properties, then you find the TCP/IP version 4 properties, you click Properties again, then you get the dialog box where you type in the IP address. Think about the number of steps that you've got to take to do that. Or you could go netshare interface, and you can do that. But that's getting deprecated because that's a command line, a cmd.exe way of doing it. Or you can use new net IP address, interface alias, what's the name of the interface? Ethernet. IP address, this is the IP address. Prefix length, well, it's another way of saying subnet mask. Default gateway, bang. We've got an IP address assigned to that adapter. To do the DNS server, we use set DNS client server address minus interface alias, Ethernet, because that's the alias we want to apply it to, DNS server address, and we can use more than one. For those of you that are taking photos, remember that all of the slides are going to be available on the website. and that a complete recording of this session is going to be available on the website. So you don't have to sit there and take things with your phone. When you can go back to your office next week, you can pull up the video and then sit in, or in VLC, scroll forward and back to your heart's content. I do that a lot. One of the things I do, especially with conferences in the US, is I go and get all of the videos and then I just sit there and I put them on 2-speed and I binge watch them. Because you don't have to watch a video unless a speaker talks very quickly at their normal speed. You can do it at double speed and then suddenly you're getting through hours of content in half the amount of time. There's some speakers that are so slow in the way they speak that you can put them on 3.5 times. So, we've renamed a computer. We've given it an IP address, joining it to a domain. Again, a single line of code. Very straightforward. Add computer, specify the domain name, that's it. Now, when you do that, you will be prompted for credentials to join the domain. Then you just restart the computer. So you've got basic diagnostics that you also like to do when you're setting up a computer. But before I get to those, let me give you a demonstration very quickly of everything I've just shown you. So here I have PowerShell ISE opened on a computer that's at the moment non-domain joined and doesn't have much of a name. Now this computer is actually running Technical Preview 3 of Server 2016, but all of this will work completely fine on Server 2012 R2. So for those of you who are a bit not necessarily familiar with Windows PowerShell ISE, ISE stands for Integrated Scripting Environment. This is built into every computer since Windows 7, Windows Server 2008. All have this. Windows Server 2008 when you apply some updates. So if you've got 2008 or 2008 R2, you've got Windows PowerShell ISE. Now, launching it is dead easy. All you have to do is you can even just right-click on a PowerShell icon and go Run ISE as administrator or Run ISE. So you can launch it that way, or you can launch it from the Programs menu as normal. Now, what ISE does is it gives you a script pane, which you can see up here, that I've got these lines of code, which is stuff I've just gone through. And then you've got an output window. So I could type PowerShell configuration here, so I can go get net IP configuration. You see it even gives me code completion. And what that'll do is it'll go there and do a check, and it'll say, what's my IP address? And we can see here that I'm just assigned to 169.254. So obviously haven't assigned anything to that computer at the moment. So the first thing I want to do is I want to take that first line of code, which all it does is it's going to say your IP address is 172.16.0.20 with a default, subnet mask of 255.255.255.0 and a default gateway of 172.16.0.1. This is all very basic stuff. To run just that line, I've got the Run Selection button. I press that and it runs. So if I then come back down here and look, go get net IP configuration, I can see I've just gone and changed my IP address on that. Next thing I want to do is I want to set the DNS server. So just highlight that, click that, bang, DNS server set. Now I want to rename the computer from its current name, which is just a random set of characters, to Ignite NZ Demo. Done. Okay? Now, obviously, to get that to apply, I'm going to need to restart the computer. Highlight that. Run. Computer restarts. That's it. So some of the sessions at Ignite have covered things like desired state configuration, which is a much more complicated technology. And that's fine if you're a lot further along in your PowerShell studies. But if you're not, these basic bits of text, you can have them sitting in a notepad window where you simply paste them into a VM, or I'll talk a little bit more about another technology called PowerShell Direct, which is available a little later, which means that you don't even have to paste them into a VM. Oops, So what we've already done is we have got a name for this computer, we've got an IP address. It's sitting on the network, it's doing everything we need it to. Next thing I need to do is, of course, join it to a domain. Well, that's fairly simple as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take Windows PowerShell ISE, I'm going to run it as an administrator. This is still in technical preview, of course, so it doesn't necessarily run as quickly as I'd like it to. Okay, so the last one I need to do here. Just make that a bit bigger. We can see add computer, domain name, ignitenz.internal. Just run that bit of code. I'm asked for credentials. So that's done. Restart the computer. We've done all of that domain join. Now, yes, you can go and do answer files. Yes, you can go and this. But a lot of what you do when you're looking at basic stuff is you're starting with tasks that you're extremely familiar with so that you can map your mind between, this is how I've done it in the past, this is how I can do it with this. Because if you grok that, if you understand that, then you can start to get into the really complicated stuff that you don't necessarily usually do. So we see here, we can go other user, and then we can go ignite nz, administrator, put the password in, and yep, domain joined, all sitting on the domain. All fairly straightforward, all simple, all most likely something that you have already automated in your own environments. Again, what I'm doing is I'm showing you basic stuff so that you understand the basics so that you can then jump from the basics and feel that you are comfortable sort of putting your toe in the water so that you can move on to more advanced stuff. But it's this basic stuff that is important. So, to verify your network adapter functionality, if you use the get network adapter statistics commandlet, you will see all of the network adapters on your computer as well as the sent and received bytes for those network adapters. Now, everybody here probably uses ping to check whether or not network adapter is working. Who here has used ping in the last 2 weeks? Exactly, right? Who here's seen that review on Amazon.com about ping the duck? After the session, go and look it up. Someone's taken the Chinese story about ping the duck, the bird that lives on the Yangtze River, and they've completely rewritten it as a sort of a treatise on the ping utility. So they do it in terms of, you know, the bird jumps off the boat and retrieves the fish, and that's obviously verifying that the host is present, and it's worth checking out. Anyway, so test net connection is a combination of ping and traceroute, and a few other things as well. So test net connection. If you just do a straight and type test net connection, what it does is it goes out to the internet and it hits a beacon that's sitting there that Microsoft says, this is just here to verify people's network connectivity. So it goes out and it says, yep, I can get there. It's going to, in this case, it took me 12 milliseconds. You can go test net connection and then specify an IP address. So this is like ping a host on your network, or in this case, I'm just pinging Google's DNS server. So again, that's giving me the same information. So test net connection instead of ping. Obviously, typing test net connection is a lot more characters than typing ping. And ping is still going to keep working, but at some point they're going to probably alias it across to test net connection, simply because test net connection can then do something like test net connection address dash traceroute. And when you do that, you get not only a verification of the fact that connectivity's been established, you get the route through which the connectivity has gone. Or you can even go further and do a test net connection, specify the address, and then specify a port number to verify that the port's open. So this is equivalent to the old trick of telnetting to a particular port to see whether or not it's open. So here we've gone to smtp.com and we're checking port 25, and we've got a verification that port 25 on smtp.com, as you'd expect with it named SMTP, is actually open. So here's a very quick way of doing a port check. Yep. You can, so when you get much more advanced with PowerShell, what you can do is you can put in a whole lot of aliases, and you could put in ping or just PI or something like that. So always be careful with your aliases because they're going to make sense to you. But the big problem with something like that is that people get into their head a whole lot of shorthand, and then they hand it off to someone else and they're looking at their scripts and they're going, I don't understand a word of what's going on here. So, and as much as I don't understand a word of what's going on here is a really great job security strategy, it's not really what we should be doing. And tomorrow I'm doing a session called 30 Bad Habits of Systems Administrators. And that's going to be one of them. It's going to be one of those sort of let's just confess our sins sessions. Because it's going to be all of those little things that we do, like hard code IP addresses for database connection strings, that we shouldn't do. Anyway, so that's tomorrow and it's about this time, in about this room, I believe. So, this one I did last year, and someone actually wrote on the evaluation, why the hell didn't you tell me this last week? We've all turned on a computer and we've tried to sign in, and it says the trust relationship with the domain is stuffed. If you log on locally with an administrator account and you run this single command, it will repair the relationship with the computer and you won't have to restart the computer. So you don't have to go through that whole rigmarole of I'm going to take you out of the domain and I'm going to put you in the domain, because we're not doing the hokey pokey, we just want the damn thing to work. So test computer secure channel minus credential domain admin, that's your domain admin credentials, repair, and lo and behold, it repairs and then it works. I even had someone on Twitter today go, I love that command. And I said, I'm doing it again. To view your event logs, get event log minus log name, in this case system, entry type error. That will give you a list of all of the errors in the event log, because we know everybody, when they do look at event logs, goes in and goes, how many red ones are there and how many yellow ones are there? This looks okay. It doesn't look all red and yellow. Right click, clear event log. It's another one of those bad system administrator habits. Because when you start off, you see one of those red ones, you go, oh, I better Google it. Oh, what's that do? Oh, okay, that's okay. Let's go on to the next one. Eventually you just go, still kind of working. Yeah, you can do it by last view. You can say last so many entries. You can actually then filter it by text. You can filter it by event ID. So all of these commands that I'm showing you actually can, with parameters, become extraordinarily more complicated. And what I suggest you do is, once you are watching the video and then you're playing with this in your own environment, is that you then type help command name or help command name examples. Or even, God forbid, go online and look at the technical documentation behind the commandlet. I know that reading the manual burns and it hurts sometimes, but it's also kind of useful. And that's the idea. But yes, all of these commands that I'm giving you are just like the tip of the iceberg on what the functionality of these commands are. And you can do really sophisticated stuff with just get event log and PowerShell. So, services, rather than pulling up the services console, we've got all of these commands around the services noun. So stop service, start service, restart service, set service, get service. Another trick with PowerShell is that there is, if you type get command minus noun, and then in this case say service, it will show you every service-related commandlet in PowerShell. So once you know, you sort of go, okay, I understand probably what each one of those does just by the name. But if you want to see all of the commands, you see a useful commandlet and you go, oh, I wonder what other commandlets are related to that. You can sort of ask PowerShell and it'll come back and tell you. There's also with PowerShell, if you type update help, what it'll do is it'll jump out to the internet and download the most recent help pages. So it's sort of like man on Unix. So PowerShell, if you let it, will teach you how to use it. but it's getting that foot in the water. It's putting your toe into the bath, and that's sort of what this session is about. So, for example, get servers piped to where object status equals stopped. That will show me a list of every stopped service on the computer. You can play around with that. One of the tricks I use a lot when I'm trying to diagnose a problem is I go and look at every service that's configured to automatically start or automatic delayed start, but that is in a stopped state. Because usually if they're meant to have started and they haven't, that's where I want to start troubleshooting. To add roles and features, very simple. There's the install Windows feature commandlet. There's the get Windows feature commandlet. Get Windows feature will tell you every every feature that can be installed automatically on that computer. Install Windows feature allows you to do it. So for example, install Windows features, install all sub-features. So that's like if you're going through that wizard and you select everything. Include the management tools, which means include the remote server administration tools for that feature. File services. This is going to go through and everything that's in file services is going to be automatically installed. So instead of clicking on, no, I don't want remote desktop services. Yes, I do want it on this computer. That's what I want. Yes, next, I'm sure. Click. You can do it very quickly with a single line of code. This one is my favourite, and this is again one I showed last year. Install Windows feature net framework core source d:\sources SXS. Anyone who has used Windows Server 2012, 2012 R2 or 2016 knows that .NET Framework 3.5 ain't included in the normal folder of installation files. For some reason, it's sitting over here in d::sources SXX, which would be fine except for so many bloody things need .NET Framework 3.5, and you're sitting there going, I'm going to install that, and you forget. What do you mean you can't find it? It's in the how can it be in the wizard and it can't be on the disk? This is busted on another disk, you know, and then you remember, oh no, they put it in a different location because someone was playing funny buggers. To view installed updates, if you want to know if an update is installed on a computer, get hotfix. And then that will give you a list of every KB article associated. It'll just give you the KB number and you'll be able to see. But what the trick is, if you use, for example, a PowerShell command that goes and gets you a list of all of your servers in an OU, and then you type a get hotfix with a particular hotfix number, that's a really quick way of doing a check of all of those servers to see whether or not that hotfix is installed. So if someone says, have you installed the latest hotfix that deals with this particular vulnerability? Building get hotfix into a command is a really quick way of checking a bunch of servers on your network, as opposed to logging onto them, as opposed to going to something like Configuration Manager or VMM to check compliance reports. So, firewall basics. New net firewall rule, display name allow inbound port 80, direction inbound, local port 80, protocol TCP, action allow. So rather than going into Windows Firewall with advanced security, very simple. Now, again, when you're setting things up with scripts, when you're deploying services with scripts or when you're deploying applications that need particular ports open, you can put all of this into a script. And all a script is all of these building blocks. Now, I'm giving you each individual Lego block here. But you're all smart people. You wouldn't have been in the industry for as long as you've been if you weren't good at learning. You just need that sort of hook to get you in. Once you've got the hook, you'll be able to put all of this together. You know, once you understand how to put two pieces of Lego together, you can go and build the Ultimate Collector's Edition Millennium Falcon. And that's a lot more fun. I did that for my 40th birthday. I bought it 6 years before, and I just waited. And then the day I turned my 40, my wife had gone off on holiday with my son back overseas, and my best mate said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to build that Millennium Falcon. And we spent 3 days, and if you actually go to Oren Thomas's Flickr page, you can see the whole construction of the Millennium Falcon. Anyway, to put in a blocking firewall rule. What this will do is this will block outbound port 80. There is no way you'd ever use this in a real scenario, but it's just an example of how you can quickly build a firewall rule without going through that wizard. Virtual machine basics. Virtual machines are fantastic with PowerShell. If I want to create a new VM from a sysprepped virtual hard disk, I've got a sysprepped virtual hard disk called disk.vhdx. So all I did to create that was I basically installed server whatever, installed all the updates, ran sysprep, generalized it, shut it down, took that VHD and then put it in a directory, and that becomes my template VHD. Then if I want to create a new VM, memory startup bytes, 2 gig, name, give it a name, NZVM, path, here's the folder where I want you to put all of the configuration files, here's the virtual hard disk, bang, that gives me a VM. To assign a virtual switch, I just get the VM's name and then assign a virtual switch. So with 2 lines of PowerShell, you can create a VM if you've got the preparation. And you can go much, much further with this to diode state configuration and injecting stuff and all of that. But just in terms of the basics of building out a lab, I'm building out labs all the time for all the books I write for Microsoft. I was able to spin up a 16 VM lab in less than 40 minutes simply because I had everything automated and it was able to do that. And that was just sitting on a Lenovo laptop with 32 gig of RAM. It wasn't sitting on a production Hyper-V machine. Now, PowerShell Direct is a technology that's available in Windows 10 and Windows Server 2016. And PowerShell Direct is really cool because it allows you to run PowerShell commands from the Hyper-V host into the VM without remoting and without signing onto it. So you saw me actually sign onto those VMs and run those commandlets. With PowerShell Direct, I wouldn't even need to do that. I could sit in my own PowerShell window and then inject those commands in. So instead of building the VM, going inside it and performing all the configuration tasks, all of those could be configured from the outside before the VM even has network connectivity. So it's a cool new feature, but most of it won't be available to simply because you're not running Server 2016 or Windows 10 yet. You don't, as I said, have to sign into a VM or remote to the VM to run commands and scripts against it. And those of you who've seen some of Ben Armstrong's sessions, this is how you really quickly provision a lab. Yep. Yes, so the only OSs that are going to support it are Windows 10 and Windows Server 2016. So it's really one of those get on board with the new stuff because we're not going to backport it to the old stuff. Okay, now as I said, requires those operating systems on the host and on the VM. So enter PS session -VM name, and when you just use enter PS session, which is usually your remoting command, and you specify the VM name parameter, that says, oh, I'm looking for a local VM, bang, straight in. And then invoke command VM name, script block, and your script block contains whatever commands. Could be 1 command, it could be 100 commands. So let's talk about Active Directory management. We've got a few common tasks that we perform. Some of these are, again, extremely basic. Now, the trick is to understand when you're dealing with user accounts, you can't just write a bit of script and say, go and assign this password to someone. What you've got to do is you've got to go and create a secure password object. And that's what this bit of text does. It takes the new password variable and it says convert to secure string, and this is your basic password. Obviously, you change this for your environment as plain text force. And what that does is it creates an encrypted version of that secure string so that that can be used in later commands. So that's my first step, and this is about as close to scripting as I'm getting in this talk. So once you've got that new PWD variable, and that can be whatever you want to call it, new AD user, in this case, I've used the name donfunk. Donfunk is an approved Microsoft name, and I use it in as many books as possible because donfunk sounds like he's an awesome guy. I've seen a picture of him, he doesn't live up to it. But in my mind, he's like Samuel L. Jackson, Idris Elba, and maybe Morgan Freeman all combined into one, except for he works as a sysadmin. So every time I've got donfunk and he's working at Contoso. That's all you need to know. I mean, it's just, how could that not be cool? New AD user, name, donfunk, account password, that new string. So what that's going to do is going to create a new AD account and it's going to assign that temporary password to them. Now, there's way more that you can do with new AD user. You can specify OUs. You can specify every user account property under the sun. But if you just want to create a quick user account, Bob's your uncle, that's what you do. Now, once you create it, the only trick you have to remember is that you need to enable the AD account. So create account, enable AD account. If you want to reset a password and force a change if someone rings you up, not that most of you wouldn't be on help desk, but if you need to do a password reset, set account password .func, new password, that password string, reset. And then set AD user, change password at logon, true. That sets that flag that says the next time they log on, they've got to go and set their own password. Now, the other thing with PowerShell is that there's a whole lot of third-party tools. There's one called PowerGUI, I think it's called, and it allows you to take any PowerShell code and turn it into a nice GUI interface. So you could take something like that and hand it off to your help desk people for them to do password resets. And PowerShell is also going to be role-based access control aware, which means that it will only allow people to see functionality that they're allowed to use, rather than being able to see every tool in the book. So you could hand off password resets to HR. Let HR worry about verifying someone's identity that rings up and says they've forgotten their password, rather than expecting you to know that, Mary Jo, who's out at the Wellington office, has 3 cats and her favourite colour is pink. Let them do all of that. And there's a lot of things that you can move out of your things just by building tools and handing them out to people in your organisation. To create a new Active Directory group, new AD group. So in this case, I've called it Aucklanders. The name is Aucklanders. The group categories, it's a security group. The scope is global, and I'm just putting it in the user container. If I wanted to put it in another container, I would change this last line. To search for accounts with non-expiring passwords, which will probably bring up a whole lot of accounts that I'll be talking about tomorrow, because we know the best way to find an administrator account in a domain is just to look for the ones who have configured their passwords to not expire. Search AD account, password never expires. We'll bring you back a list. Search for accounts that haven't logged on for 90 days. All we do there is search AD account, account inactive, time span, 90 days. Search for locked out accounts. Again, straightforward. Search AD account, locked out. Search for disabled accounts, account disabled. Search AD account is very useful for going into your AD database and looking for accounts that are doing things that they shouldn't be doing, or accounts that are worthy of your attention. Because that's one of the other things we don't do a lot of, is AD account maintenance, a database maintenance. We don't go in and check, hey, we've got a certain turnover at these organisations. How many accounts in our AD databases are of people that have left the company, who haven't logged on for 90 days, who may not even exist anymore? So let's just do a quick demo. So here I am on a domain controller. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take that new password and convert it to the secure string, run that. So that's put that variable into memory, into my PowerShell session. So now, if I want to go and create, before I do this, let me just show you that, there's no pigeon in the box, so to speak. Active Directory users and computers. Here's our users container, and we can see here that there is no .func. Okay? So what we'll do is we'll go and create .func. It'll take a little moment to go and do. Now, obviously this works if you've got the permissions to do it, and it won't work if you don't have the permissions not to do it. Okay, now we've got to enable that account. And that's done. So what I'll do now is I'll go and create my new group called Aucklanders, and I do that. So what we can do now is we can come back to Active Directory users and computers. We can right click on here, we can go refresh, and we see we've got our Aucklanders security group that we've created. And down here, we've got a user named .func. All very simple, but again, as I said, that this is the first hit. once you start playing with this, you can get a lot more complicated and start doing really useful stuff as opposed to demonstration stuff. Now, ISE snippets. You saw I've been using ISE. ISE snippets are a way to take commonly used bits of code and actually build them into the ISE so that you can use them. So instead of having to remember all of these bits and pieces, you can actually just pull it in. So for example, you've got a frequently used bit of PowerShell code that you want part of ISE. It requires that you do set the execution policy to unrestricted, which is just use a set execution policy command and go unrestricted. And that's just to stop people from running unauthorized scripts in your environment. So here I have a bit of code that says new ISE snippet, force title password string, description secure password string text, new password convert to secure string, string password as plaintext force, which is what I showed you before. The only thing you need to take aware of is this little caret here. That's an escape character, because if I don't use the escape character, it's going to ignore the $. So this is what it looks like in the ISE when you run it. Is a little menu comes up and I can select password string and then I'll inject that into ISE. But let me show you it very quickly. So here I go across to my, here, and this is this bit of code I just showed you on the screen. So I then run that bit of code. So now if I'm over here in a blank session and I go Control J, this will bring up the list of code shortcuts I've put in there. And then I can go down here and go password string and hit enter, and it'll automatically type it in. So that's what snippets are. So you've got all of these bits and pieces, and as you are learning as an administrator about these commands, all you do is you take the really useful ones and then you go and put them in snippets so that you don't even have to go to your notebook to figure out what these things are. You've built them into Windows PowerShell ISE. Yes, so you can export snippets and you can import snippets. So if you do a get command snippets, there's, export and import. They're just basically a bit of XML with that code I put in. So they're very small as well. So DNS management. We all got to look after DNS servers. To create a new primary zone in DNS, add active DNS server primary zone. Name, West Island.ignitenz.internal, as someone told me I came from the West Island. Replication scope, forest, which means that it's going to replicate to every Active Directory integrated DNS server in the forest. If I want to go and create a host record, and obviously you can go and create any type of host record, this is just the command that you use to create a normal host A record. Name Wellington, zone name, ignitenz.internal, allow update any, which means anybody can go and change it. This is the IP address to associate it, and here's a TTL value for that record. Let me give you a quick demo of that. So first, again, what I'll do is I will bring up the DNS console. And if we go to forward lookup zones there, we see we've only got ignitenz.internal. So we will add that primary zone, one command. And now we've got a DNS zone called westisland.ignitenz. When that finishes executing. And then if we want to go and create an actual record, straightforward again. So we come back here. We do a refresh on our lookup zones. So now we've got westisland.ignitenz. And if we go into Ignite internal, I see I've got my host 23, which I should have gone and put that in the West Island zone, I think, but host 23 in the ignitenz.internal zone. Now, when you're thinking, you may have heard about desired state configuration and how you can go and get it to install a DNS server. Well, with this, what you could do is you could actually go and use a PowerShell script to completely pre-populate as a disaster recovery method. It's inefficient, but if you want to go and set something up very quickly, you're starting to see how easy it is to start building scripts to go and populate all of these things, all of these static records, or in a sec, we're going to talk about DHCP. So DHCP, again, fairly straightforward. To add a scope, you use the add DHCP server v4 scope commandlet. You give it a name, you give it a start range, you give it an end range, you give it a subnet mask. To create a reservation in the scope, you specify the DHCP server you want to create the reservation on. In this one, it's called domain control.ignite.nz.internal. You specify the scope ID on the basis of the network address that's identified with the scope. You specify the address of the reservation, in this case 172.16.0.200. You then specify the MAC address that you want to associate with the reservation, and then you provide a description. To set scope options, you just need to know the option number. So for example, to set the DNS server address, you need option 006. And then you specify the IP address. To set the gateway address, you specify option 003, which is the default gateway address. Let me do a demo there, and there is a... Just got a mistake actually in this line here where I've got option 2 rather than option 3. Okay, so let's take this first one. Oops, a daisy. Add DHCP server scope. Oh, so sorry. Again, let me show you that there's no scope there at the moment. So we've got IPv4 and there's no scopes. So we'll go and create the scope. So the scope's created. Let's go and create a reservation for a particular IP address. That's done. Let's go and set the DNS server for that scope. That's done. Let's go and set the default gateway for that scope. That's done. So we come back to DHCP here. We do a refresh. And what we see here is that we now have a scope called Alpha Scope. And if we go into the scope options, we can see that we've got those two scope options configured. And then if we go down here to reservations, we see that we've got that reservation configured. Again, this is all really basic stuff that you know backwards. What I'm showing you how to do is how to do it very quickly in Windows PowerShell. So the last thing I want to talk about is file server management. File server management, you're always creating file shares. There's a bunch of PowerShell commands that allow you to go and manage those file shares. For example, to go and create a new file share, new SMB share, specify the name of the share, in this case, shared folder. Specify the path to the share, C:/shared folder, because I'm really creative. Specify access permissions on the shared folder. So in this case, I've said full access to Ignite NZ/administrator, but read access to Ignite NZ.donfunc. So let me just quickly show you how that works. So if we go into the computer management console here, and we go to shared folders and into shares, we see that they've just got the default shares there. Let's come back into PowerShell ISE and run that command. So we do that, and then we come back here into the control panel. We do a refresh, and now we've got our shared folder. And if we double click on our shared folder and go across to shared permissions, we see we've got donfunc who's got read access, and we've got the administrator account that's got full control. Again, that's a lot quicker than doing it through the GUI. So in summary, in this session, I talked about basic configuration tasks. I talked about the ways that you could manage core roles in Windows PowerShell, and I also talked about snippets. I am very happy to answer your questions. We've got about 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Oh. So